Hi, I'm Letitia Mooney. I'm the director of Brutal Pixie. Welcome to this part of the course. What you're looking at is the content strategy risk canvas. This, if you know the business model canvas by Strategizer at all, one of the most famous canvases, this will be quite familiar to you. It's been built slightly differently, and as you can see, it contains 9 areas. This is the copy of the canvas that you will have access to. You will get access to this as a Google Doc. What you need to do when you start to use it is to make a copy and save it in your own drive. Otherwise, everybody will see what you've got. So our scenario for this situation is a small to medium law firm. So what we're going to do, let's just put that in here, with a basic content framework, which includes a blog, one social media channel. Let's just include the blog for this time being, because it's quite easy. So what we need to do is, when we start thinking about risk in this content framework, is look at all of the things that can impact on this particular scenario, which I will just put in a different color. In the first place, we have to think about stakeholders. If you don't like the term stakeholders, which a lot of people don't, which we may even change on this canvas, is to change it to interested parties. What this does in changing the terminology is it makes us think about all of the interested parties that are or could be involved, rather than just stakeholders and not just people who have a stake in what's going on. In terms of a small to medium-sized law firm, the risk of the interested parties, so we need to work out who those interested parties are. We might have the practice manager, we might have a principal lawyer, we might have an administrator or content creator. What we need to actually think about is what the risk those people are, the risk those people pose. The principal lawyer, the risk is a bottleneck. The practice manager could be the same thing. The administrator might be distracted with other work. The other thing is that some of the interested parties may find that they are actually not that interested. So there could be interest levels that are a risk. Engagement in the project is a risk. And they may also devalue or pull funding from, if we can spell, depending on, how they see things. So you can put all of those risks under there. In terms of people, one of the biggest risks to any project, which anyone will tell you, is people. And what you can see in this canvas is that actually people make up a lot of these segments. The way you think about them is the challenge for you. In terms of delivering blogs for a small to medium-sized business, the risk could be, in terms of people, might be illness, nobody else to write. Or absence, nobody to approve it. The other risk could be, in the people risk, maybe there is something else that could go on. These are 2 of the typical risks that we can put in. In risk 3, in value, the way to think about this is the risk to the topic or the value proposition. This is a much more difficult way of approaching risk. So when you think about topics or value propositions, it's the risk in your set value proposition properly to your content strategy. In terms of delivering digital content, the risk, therefore, is something along the lines of maybe the proposition doesn't fit the customers anymore, which means that, therefore, the content isn't quite right. That's a risk. It might also be, there's another risk in the topic, is that maybe the market is saturated with this topic. It could be something else. These are risks that we need to address. In relationship, we start to think about relevance. And as you'll work through the content strategy risk canvas, what you'll find is that your brain starts kind of saying things like, hey, look, some of these things actually overlap. That's okay. You can put risks in more than one category because this is really a way for you to see what those risks are. It's not necessarily how you're going to address them because at this stage you don't even have a weighting or a triage scale of any kind for these risks, so you don't quite know where you're going to take them. You'll start to think about that as you write them down, for sure. But right now, this is just populating the canvas. Under relevance, what we're thinking about is the relationship between your business and its content and your clientele. So the relevance, the risk in the relevance is that if the proposition doesn't fit, then the content is no longer relevant to the client. There might also be that there is a demographic shift in your client base for whatever reason. Firms often find that, especially if they are multidisciplinary firms, the demographics tend to do shift because businesses and people change. So there might be a demographic shift, which then means that the pitch in the content isn't right, or the tone, or whatever the case may be. Or perhaps there's a new product in the market which has caused a whole lot of people searching for other things, meaning your product doesn't fit anymore. So maybe there's a product market fit issue that ties into the content. The customer is about the demographic and the profile properly. So it could be if you're working in family law in an economic turn down, that perhaps even though you are working on, like succession or wills or something like that, maybe actually the demographic has shifted and people are separating because economic pressures tend to do that to families. So in this, you could say that there might be a demographic shift away from stable families, and that the audience emerges as people caring more about separation. It could be that your audience grows up and maybe they start having children or whatever the case is. The risk to you is that your pitch is hitting the wrong audience. Could be that your content brings in the wrong market and a range of other things, but you would need to be quite specific in there. In systems, we're thinking about types of systems and technology, which is quite huge because in this area, we're not just thinking about the technological systems, such as a WordPress failure or a hosting failure, both of which could happen. So we can put those in here. Hosting failure, there might be a server overload. There could be a whole bunch of other things. There could be a database might corrupt itself. You might get a virus. But it also talks about business systems because you might get more staff, which then mean that the systems get reviewed or that the responsibility moves to someone else. And it could be that as you keep doing things, that perhaps the lines of governance start to shift so that that can all go in here. Starts to shift, meaning the approval lines need to be updated. The other risks that you have here in terms of systems and technology are external providers, like how you manage drafts, for example. So it could be everything from email to Dropbox. What does that look like and what sort of risks do they pose to you especially if server space, for example, in Dropbox is taken down. You need to put all of those in here. I've put in a really high level view. You can make them very, very specific, which is why in one of the other areas we're going to start talking about what if analysis and pre-mortems, which will get us thinking about all of the possible ways that things can go wrong. In channel 7, which is a distribution sector, we're thinking about channels. So what do we mean by channels? We mean things like social media. We mean things like editorial. We mean things like websites. We mean things like letters. We mean things like advertising. There are all sorts of ways that your channels can pose risks to you. One of them may involve, people reporting the content that you do. People might report it, or blocked accounts. You might have accounts that shut down if channels are sold or merged. Like, for example, Microsoft has just acquired LinkedIn. That may or may not change that channel. And if your channel is primarily a LinkedIn channel, that's a risk to you. So you can put all of the risks to your business by relying on particular channels in that section. Now, at the bottom, we have 2 money columns. This is because we really need to think about risk in 2 different ways when we come to finance. The first is the financial cost to you. So you might have a freelancer fees that go up. If you use an Upworker, maybe Upwork's fees rise. You might have an exchange rate problem. You might find that the money that you're spending isn't coming back to you. I don't know if you put that in expense. You possibly will. You might find that you need number of expenses increases. For example, designers, developers, number of vendors, like videographers, that kind of thing. All of these are potential risks to you in terms of money, and it's really a good idea to list them all so that you can see them with clarity. The risk to you in terms of revenue is where we start getting into some really pointy things. We've started thinking about what happens if, the relevance isn't there anymore, if your customer demographic shifts, if your value proposition actually isn't a value proposition anymore, maybe the sale needs to be pointed somewhere else, and interested parties. But what we haven't thought about are risks that could be really significant risks to you. You might have a defamation claim, which could be a really significant income risk to you. You might publish incorrect information, which could have an impact on what sort of clientele you get, and whether or not that gets picked up by other people could turn into quite a crisis. You might publish information that then leads to you being reprimanded by your law society, for example. So you might contravene uniform law or have to be reprimanded, and that could lead to a loss of revenue as well, because people publish that kind of thing. And eventually it may impact on your client basis. There's a whole bunch of other things in terms of dollar value, in terms of your revenue. What you need to think about is how then all these things could turn into a crisis, which is also valuable to use. Once you've done all of this, you can save your document. When you get your own copy, go here, go make a copy and put it into your own drive. Otherwise, as I said earlier, all of your edits will be added and everybody will see them, which is mostly not a problem until it is. So that's pretty much how to use it. What you have to think about when you start using it is you will start using it in this kind of high level way until you start drilling down. When you start drilling down, you may find that this will split over a bunch of pages, and that's okay. You can change it, create your own version if you have a lot of them. You may also consider, when you start using the content strategy risk canvas, that perhaps you need to do this kind of thinking in layers. Might be very possible that you would do one for a high level, such as this kind of workflow level, and you might also do one for something that's a little bit deeper and more difficult to deal with, which might be at this kind of level where we're talking about engagement in projects. In any case, what you have then is a very clear picture of the entire landscape. From this one canvas, you can see that there are lots of little ways that things can go wrong. And when you're working in content particularly, these are all things that cause projects to be delayed. They can also cause problems in terms of interpersonal relations. They can cause problems in terms of, higher output than what you're getting back. And this gives you a starting place to start thinking about, well, if given this is a risk, how can we eliminate it or mitigate it or put a system in place that's going to capture things when it starts becoming a problem? Once you know what all of those areas are, you will start to see them as they come up. So that is how to use it. Simple, really. Thanks for joining me. In the next episode or part of this lesson, we'll start thinking about things like pre-mortem workshops, which will then give you a different way into populating this canvas and thinking about things in a new way.